Yo, what's going on, you guys? It's your boy Ben Mahari here, representing Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the basketball community. You understand what I'm saying? If you want more basketball content, you go check out my show, Basketball Conversations, every Friday night, 9 p.m. Central Time. It's where we discuss basketball-related topics, news, debates, and everything else in the world of basketball. If you are new to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon to get all the latest notifications when I start dropping videos and live streams. And please spread the word about the channel as well. All right. So, with all that out the way, let's get down to business here, shall we? So, I've had a chance to really think about, the video that Too Raw for TV did, a couple weeks back. And he was talking about the career of Patrick Ewing. You know what I mean? And I want to express to you guys my thoughts about him. Now, originally, I wanted to do one about Patrick Ewing after some of the things Charles Oakley has said about Patrick Ewing. But after Patrick announced that he had COVID-19, I obviously, released some videos about that. And I didn't do one about him until, some of that died down. But Charles Oakley had some things about Patrick Ewing that really made me think. He pretty much said that Patrick Ewing was the reason why we didn't get a championship. That nobody on the team respected him. Nobody got along with Patrick Ewing, and he didn't elevate his game to a high enough level to get us to get them to a championship. And so after hearing him about what he said, it made me really think about the career of Patrick Ewing and about his entire totality of his game. And I heard some very good points about what Too Raw said too. So go check it out on his video too. But after really, really thinking about it, and also I debated about Ticket TV about this though too when it came to Patrick Ewing as well. And Ticket always gives out how he gives it out. But I never back down from him. But the thing is this about Patrick Ewing. My thing about Patrick Ewing is simply this. I will always believe that he's a great player. There's no doubt in my mind he's a Hall of Famer. He is in a Hall of Fame, and he's one of the best centers of all time. Now, if you put him on a grander scale of top 50 players, he belongs in that category. Top 30, you could say that. Not top 20, and definitely not top 10. Now, the thing about Patrick Ewing that really made me think is what Charles Oakley basically said about Ewing was that he didn't elevate this team enough to get us over the hump, and he didn't want it bad enough. Now, here's my thing about Patrick Ewing. I will always say that Patrick Ewing is one of the most toughest people to ever play basketball. Now, nobody will ever question about his physical and mental toughness. During that 1999 NBA playoffs, when they were the A seed, Patrick Ewing played that playoffs with a partially torn Achilles tendon in his right or left leg. I think it was his right leg, and to the point where he couldn't go anymore. That the injury got progressively worse, and he had to sit out the entire postseason. So I will never question about Patrick Ewing's toughness and his mental fortitude. But when I really think about the career about Patrick Ewing, it made me think that he left a lot more on the table that he should have elevated to. And why I say that, the reason is this: is that with Patrick Ewing is this: as good of a player that he did not have the killer instinct that a Jordan had or Reggie Miller had. When you were playing in the Eastern Conference, when you got to go against Michael Jordan and the Bulls every year, Reggie Miller and the Pacers every year, you know what I mean? You got to have that killer instinct. You got to have that that eye of the tiger look when you're trying to get over the hump and win those big games in the playoffs. And I really felt that Ewing, as great as he was consistently a 20-point game scorer, but he did not do enough to get the Knicks over the hump during the 90s. Now, I was a young infant at that time when the Knicks and the Bulls rivalry was at its complex mode. But I've seen enough games on YouTube and watched enough footage all around to really understand how significant and how great that rivalry was. But the best year for the Knicks to win that title was back in 1993. They won 62 regular season games. They beaten the Bulls 3 out of 4 times during that regular season. but there was so much left on the table that Ewing did not take advantage of that made me really think that he just didn't have it in his mental mind to go all the way with it. Now, when you look at his career, averages, he averaged 21 points per game and 9.8 rebounds per game, which is very, very impressive, looking at it. But when you look at the totality of his stats, he didn't do enough to get his teams over. You know what I mean? That 92-93 year was when they won 62 regular season games. He averaged 22.2 points per game. And in terms of the rebounding, he also averaged 12-point rebounds per game, which is obviously was his career high at that time. And then during the playoffs, particularly against the Chicago Bulls, he averaged about 25.5 points per game and 10.9 rebounds per game. Pretty good numbers, consistent numbers. Not good, not bad numbers. But the thing with Patrick Ewing was that he always had an issue about elevating his play to another level. And I think that's where a lot of the criticism from Charles Oakley comes from, because Patrick didn't want it bad enough. Now, when you look back at that 93 season, all right, what is the one main common denominator that Knicks fans like to blame all this time, even today? Charles Smith. You know what I mean? Because he obviously choked when he was underneath the basket, and and then Pippen was blocking him from behind. Jordan was stripping him down low, and Horace Grant was blocking him from the side. And that year, the Knicks won 27 straight games in the Garden. All right, they had not lost a game in almost a few months, and at home at least. And the Knicks went into the Garden, tied at 2 games apiece, and lost that game. And by the time it was Game 6, the Knicks tried to make it competitive as much as they could, but you knew that the Bulls were going to close it out one way or another, and they lost that series in 6. And Patrick Ewing had good numbers. He had 24 points per game, but when you really look at the totality of those of that series, when you watch it, there were times where Patrick Ewing would spend stretches of the second half, not touching the ball, or even not even getting not even, looking to score. You know what I mean? Because the one thing that I had a problem with Ewing is he settled way too much for that 20-foot jump shot. Because as a Bulls fan, I love it. Because if you keep Ewing away from the blocks, he won't get your inside interior in foul trouble. Because the Knicks had the ultimate advantage at center. And every time when the Bulls face against the Knicks, they always try to make sure to get Patrick Ewing to shoot 20-foot jump shots. You know what I mean? You'd rather see him take jump shots than rather him going on the block and basically turn his face and beat you off the dribble and get you in your inside players in foul trouble. You know what I'm saying? And we were so lucky not to face against Olajuwon, because Olajuwon would have taken advantage of those opportunities. And if you were to look back at that 93 year, that was the weak point. No disrespect to Bill Cartwright, but that was an older Bill Cartwright. And, injuries and age was slowing down on him. And, there were times where Ewing would not even try to post up against Bill Cartwright. And it just really frustrated me, because, you know, he would face up against Bill Cartwright, back him down at least 2 times, and then take a turnaround jumper. And it's like, you're quicker and much more stronger than Bill Cartwright. Why are you not taking him off the dribble and beating him to the basket? And that's where a lot of that criticism comes into play. Now, number 2, there's one little thing about Patrick Ewing that really just makes me shake my head. He shoots off of double teams a lot, which is one of the reasons why his assist numbers are pretty much pretty down. You know what I mean? Because the thing with Patrick Ewing is this: he would get the ball, all right, and he would get double team or even triple team, and he would not pass the ball out of the double team. And imagine if you're an Oakley, if you're Charles Smith, if you're John Starks, you know what I mean? You're waiting for the ball to come out of the double team, and Patrick never throws the ball out of the double team. Like, I never understood that. I never get it. And it's just one of those things where it's just Patrick Ewing's, decision making was very, very questionable, and his shot selection. Because you cannot tell me that a 7-footer like you and you're not gonna go on the block and and basically beat those guys off the dribble. You know what I mean? And Patrick deserves the majority of the blame for that 93 series because even though he put up consistent good numbers, he didn't show up. He didn't elevate his game to his A game to another level to get the Knicks over the Bulls during that year. And he deserves a lot of blame for that. Now we fast forward to 94. All right. This is the year when Michael Jordan retired from basketball and obviously, played baseball. So let me drink my Gatorade first before we get into that. So the Knicks that year, Patrick Ewing put it out on the New York Post. We will win it all, and pretty much that's what the Knicks were planning on doing. They only had one goal, and that was to win the championship. You think about this for a moment. It took 7 games to beat the Chicago Bulls without Michael Jordan. All right, there were times where I felt like Ewing was just settling too much for that open jump shot, and sometimes they go in, and most times they don't. And it's one of those things where it's like, really, Patrick, you could easily beat these guys off the dribble, especially that 94 series. There were times where Ewing would just settle too much for that jump shot, and it just drove you insane if you're a Knicks fan. Now imagine if Michael was still around in '94. I I believe hardly now that the Knicks would lose to the Bulls again. But also, you also got to reflect back about that Game 5 when Hugh Hollins made one of the worst calls in NBA history when he basically called the foul on Scottie Pippen for basically knocking down Hubert Davis after the shot was already in the air and had nothing to do with the trajectory of the release. That was a terrible call. But, the Knicks went on to beat the Bulls in 7 games. And here's the other thing, too, that most Knicks fans don't remember, too. There was one game against the Indiana Pacers. It was Game 3 during Memorial Day weekend of '94, where Patrick Ewing and his Knicks only scored 68 points. At that time, it was the lowest point total since the creation of the 24-second shot clock. And get this, Patrick Ewing during that whole game scored 1 point. 1 point. And that was off of a free throw. And you shook your head and you're like, bro, where are you, Patrick? Where are you when the team needs you? And that's why Oakley had some of those sentiments about Ewing even more recently. Now, the reason why Oakley said that was because Ewing and the various other Knick legends did not speak up for him during the whole feud with James Dolan. So that's a little side note with that. But 1 point in a playoff game. That's where many folks just were like turned away against Patrick Ewing. Okay. Now he did turn it around and then basically helped beat the Pacers in Game 7, but it took a lot more out of that Knicks team to try to beat the Pacers because if the Pacers didn't blew their chances in Game 6, I think they would have beaten the Knicks again. I mean, I'm sorry, they would have beaten the Knicks and sent them packing in 6 games again after leading the series 2-0. Then we also turned into the 1994 NBA Finals when the Knicks were faced against the Houston Rockets against, league MVP and Defensive Player of the Year, Hakeem Olajuwon. Okay. And this was the rematch of that great 84 title game when those two great centers were in college. And so it was going to be a pretty much a classic series from start to finish. So there were times in that series where Patrick Ewing would pretty much settle way too much for that open jump shot. Now, some people might give credit to Olajuwon's defense, and there's no doubt Ewing. I mean, Olajuwon was the defensive player of the year for crying out loud for a reason. But there were so many times where I felt like Patrick Ewing was just settling too much for that jump shot, and I remember there was one particular moment in the game where he was being double teamed by Olajuwon and Robert Ory and would not pass the ball out of the double team. You know what I mean? It's those kind of things that made me shake my head when it came to Ewing and his game. And that entire series against the Rockets, okay, Ewing only averaged 18.9 points per game and only shot 36% from the field, while Hakeem pretty much dominated the series, scoring 26.9 points per game, okay, and also shooting 43% from the field. I mean, I never got it. I never understood it. Now, some people can reflect back on John Starks' horrible shooting performance in Game 7. Now, that was one of the major reasons why they lost. But let's keep in mind here, okay? They would have never gotten to a Game 7 if it wasn't for John Starks' brilliant shooting in that Game 6 when he scored 16 points in that fourth quarter and nearly led the Knicks to the title, okay? And if John Starks had a little bit more time to pull off that jump shot after switching, with Vernon Maxwell and Hakeem on that pick and roll, you know what I mean? I think that the Knicks would have went on to win the championship that year. But the greatness of Elijah one, after he momentarily slipped, he had to really run back and get his fingertips on the ball, and it was enough to basically disrupt the shot. Game over, Game 7. And from that point forward, Ewing didn't do enough. The thing with Ewing is that he puts up good, consistent numbers, right? But he never elevated his game enough to get his team over the hump. And he only had one game in that series where he scored 25 points in Game 5. That was the same time that was the same game where the OJ chase took place. I remember I remembered some of when NBC was going back and forth between the Bronco chase and the final game. Game 5. It was a weird moment. But the thing with Ewing was this. Ewing didn't do enough. He left a lot more on the table than people tend to give give him credit for. He could have done more, and he didn't. You know what I mean? He only had he only had one game when he only scored 25 points in Game 5. That's about it. Olajuwon pretty much outplayed him that whole series and won the title because of that. And so after that, there were some rumblings that Ewing and his team probably was not going to get over the hump. Then you fast forward to 1985, conference semifinals, the rematch against the Indiana Pacers. Okay, now besides that, the 8-point scoring spree by Reggie Miller in Game 1, when you look back at that series, okay, Rick Smits, who was another 7-footer with great range, okay, but that does get into foul trouble a lot. You think about this for a moment. Rick Smits, during that entire series, he averaged 22.6 points per game and basically had the same average as Reggie Miller, while Ewing only averaged 19.3 points per game. Okay, during that whole series against the Pacers. For field goal percentage, he shot 49%, while Smits shot 60% from the field. Think about that for a moment. 60% from the field, and Ewing shot, 49%. I want y'all to think about that, because I can understand. Listen, Ewing was going through a lot of injuries. He also had the bad hamstring and had operations on his knees, but then also had the calf injury too. But he got outplayed and outclassed by Rick Smits in that series. And if it wasn't for Game 5, where Ewing basically traveled on that game-winning shot, they should have lost that series in 5 games. But it went to a 7 game, and the Knicks were down by 2 points with about 5 seconds remaining. Ewing had a chance to basically tie the ball game with one dunk that all he had to do was basically go up and dunk it. But Ewing beat the double team, and he thought he was going to get hit, but instead he took and did a finger roll layup that hit the back iron of the rim, and it bounced out. I mean, if you could see how the Garden just went into a complete, shock after that missed layup, man, that was a killer moment. And put it like this, it pretty much closed the era of Pat Riley, because Riley knew that it was already 4 years since he's been coach of the Knicks, okay? And he knew that with the roster that they assembled, that the way that Ewing did not show up in key moments, that they were not going to win a championship with Patrick Ewing as their main main player. And pretty much it was one of the reasons why Pat Riley left the Knicks after 95. Now, people always will like to reflect about, oh, the Knicks got screwed in 97. Now, I do agree with that. I do agree that the Knicks got horribly treated by the NBA after that brawl with PJ Brown and Charlie Ward that got some of the key Knicks players like Larry Johnson, John Starks, Allen Houston, and Ewing himself, suspended when they were up 3-1. But I don't. But people will say, "Oh, the Knicks would have beaten the Bulls in that '97 series." Nope, it was never going to happen. By that time, the Bulls would have been too difficult for the Knicks to deal with. I'm not trying to hear it. The Bulls would have gotten them again, and then what we were going to say by then. So I really think that Patrick Ewing, was a great player for what he was able to do, and he deserves a lot more credit he's been given. But if we really want to act on all honesty about his career, he left way too much on the table than he should have. He should have had at least 1 to 2 rings. 93 and 94 were his best chances to win a ring, and he did not do enough to get the Knicks over the hump against Chicago and against Houston. Okay, and when you look back at his entire career, as talented as he was, he just did not do enough to get the Knicks to a championship. And there's a lot of Knicks fans that kind of give Ewing some respect, but they always refer to the fact about how he did not show up in those big moments. And unfortunately, it is put a black mark on his resume as a great basketball player, because when you look at it from his totality, he's one of the great Knicks players of all time. But without that ring, you know how brutal Knicks fans are, and actually New York sports fans are. They're going to reflect on about how Ewing, missed the golden chances to win a championship and did not do it. By the time, the Knicks made the conference finals in 99 and 2000, Ewing was no longer the centerpiece because the team was basically revolved around Latrell Sprewell and Allen Houston. And so I don't even count that at all. But that's just how I feel about it. I felt like, Ewing should have done more to get his team over, but he didn't do enough. And he didn't do enough. Great players, regardless of the talent around them, have the ability to get their teams over and do more to get them where they wanted to go. And Ewing, as talented as he was, like I said, and I'm going to keep saying it, he didn't do enough to win a championship. But tell me what you guys think in the comments section. Let me know what you guys think about Patrick Ewing and his career.